Hey guys, welcome to my first drive video on Porsche's Taycan Turbo S. About 2 years ago, my good friend Tom threw me the keys to his Taycan 4S. That was the first modern Porsche I'd driven in a few years, and it just happened to be their brand new all-electric model. I was blown away by the 4S. It was one of the fastest cars I'd ever driven, and I did think to myself, why would you need a turbo or a Turbo S when you've already got that much power and available torque? Then almost exactly 12 months ago, Porsche GB threw me the keys to one of their rear-wheel drive Taycans, which is the entry model version. That was the first press car I got from Porsche GB, so it was a real milestone moment for me. And once again, I have to thank you lot for that. I really enjoyed that particular car. Yes, it was the lowest power and the lowest torque of the Taycan range, and it was only rear-wheel drive, but to me it really felt perfect. It felt more of a driver's car compared to the 4S. It was a little bit lighter, had a bit more steering feel, and I went away from that really impressed. And in fact, even to this day, the Taycan base, or the Taycan rear-wheel drive as people refer it to, is my favourite driver's Taycan and my favourite driver's electric car. So what is this absolute beast going to be like? Today, a Taycan 4S will set you back about £84,000 before options, and the base Taycan will set you back about £73,000. This flagship Turbo S, well, it's almost double that at £139,000. Once you factor in the £15,000 worth of options that are on it, well, you're looking at £154,000, which is only a fraction cheaper than that Panamera Turbo S e-hybrid Sport Turismo I had recently on the channel. And in fact, the similarities don't finish there. That Panamera had a combined 700 horsepower of output. This car, 761 horsepower. And compared to the Panamera's crazy 870 Newton meters of torque, just when you thought you couldn't imagine a bigger figure than that, well, this one cracks 1,050 Newton meters to be precise. And all of that power and all of that torque will propel this near 2.4 ton luxury barge from 0 to 62 miles an hour in a claimed 2.8 seconds. And we'll test that out with the race box very soon. This will also go on to a top speed of 162 miles an hour, which is really impressive because although the majority of EVs will accelerate very fast off the lights and do a very quick 0 to 60 or 0 to 100 mile an hour time, once they get above 100 miles an hour, they tend to run out of puff, but not this one. So this would be good for your German Autobahn. This car's 93 kilowatt hour battery gives it a claimed range of about 250 miles, although in the time that I've had it, I've found that figure to be closer to about 215 miles, although the weather has been fairly cold, between about 4 degrees and 6 degrees, and I'm sure during the summer months that will definitely go up to a realistic range of about 230 miles. As with the Panamera, the Taycan is now also available in Sport Turismo, guys. Sport Turismo means extended roof or shooting brake, estate if you like. And to me, it's the best value option available on the Taycan, because to get this in a Sport Turismo will only cost you an extra £1,000. And there's two reasons I say that. The first one being practicality. Although this car is almost 5 meters long, the cabin itself's not particularly large. It's okay in the front seats, but it's quite tight in the rear seats. I'll check out my original video on Tom's 4S, where I go through the cabin and talk about its practicalities in far more detail. There'll be a link to that video up here. And also its boot space. Although this one does have two, it has a frunk in the front, just like a 911, and that's 85 litres. And then we've got one in the back, as most traditional saloons do, that's about 360 litres. But it's not the biggest opening and it's not the most practical boot. Whereas in the Sport Turismo, well, you're going to have that wagon appeal. My second reason are its looks. Although in saloon version, it's a very good looking car, in Sport Turismo version, it's just drop dead gorgeous, just as it is with the Panamera. And if that's not enough, Porsche also offer the Taycan in a Cross Turismo version. It looks very similar to the Sport Turismo, but it's slightly jacked up and it looks a bit more off-roady, a bit like an A6 all-road, if you like. It's going to appeal to those that like their SUVs, etc. I'm sure the handling dynamics are slightly sacrificed on that particular car compared to this or the Sport Turismo. So for me, without driving the Cross Turismo or the Sport Turismo, well, my money would definitely go on that Sport Turismo. Jumping in a Taycan for the first time is mind-blowing, it really is. The fit and finish, the design, the simplicity, everything, it's just beautiful. And although I've sat in a few since I sat in Tom's 2 years ago, every time I get in one, every time I get in this car that I've had for 5 days, it's just such a nice place to climb into. Although it's not an easy place to climb into because these B pillars, well, they sit quite far forward, which means that the front doors are fairly short and the opening is quite small, and so getting into the driver's seat or the front passenger seat isn't the easiest operation for a big lump like me. And the same is said for the rear bench. Those rear doors are tiny, and although this is a big car on the outside, well, it's quite limited for space in the back. Lou was in there yesterday. Lou's about 5'8.5", and she just about had enough headroom and just about had enough legroom. Her knees were touching the back of the seat. So don't think of this as a large family car, because it's not. Its cabin, I would say, is probably smaller and tighter than, let's say, a BMW 3 Series. But if you look past that and you just take in all of the beautiful leather and design around us, it's just lovely. And when you turn it all on for the first time, well, it's just, look at this dash. And there's actually buttons within this dash as well. And you've got all of this. Yes, it is all touchscreen, which for me is a bit of a headache. I wish there was some buttons down here for, let's say, regular use buttons, like some of the climate control. But it works okay. I've had to clean it for this filming today because it had my grubby fingerprints all over it and dust all over it, which is something that you need to learn to live with if you own something like this or one of Audi's latest touchscreen systems like in their RS6. But just the way everything comes together. We've got the black leather on the dashboard and on the lowers. We've got the red seats and the red center console, and we've got a red stripe of leather down the door cards. It's just so lovely. We've got this lovely, I think they call it the Sports GT steering wheel, the same one that I had in the recent Panamera Turbo S, and I think in fact the same one that I tried in a 992 GTS. It's just lovely. Nice and thin rim, which induces as much steering feel as possible, and everything you need on here, but none of the buttons are intrusive. They don't come anywhere close to the outside of the rim of the wheel, so you don't foul them by accident. You've got a drive mode there. It's just simple and everything works. Even the climate control vents aren't manually adjustable. You need to go into the PCM to move them around. Slight overkill if you ask me, but it is just Porsche showing you how much technology is packed into one of their products. I love the instrument binnacle. Although it's completely digital, it still reminds me very much of their original analog displays. You've got 3 circular displays there, and you can play around with what you want on those displays, so you can adjust them to suit your mood or to suit your preferences. And you've got the speedo right in the middle there. And on this car, obviously, it shows you how much power you're using. A lot of the time, you don't tend to use much more than about 20% of its power, because it's just impossible to use much more than that on the public road. Talking of that, let's get this car out on the road and we'll start by testing out its acceleration figures. Porsche claim this Taycan Turbo S will do the 0 to 62 sprint in just 2.8 seconds. My Racebox Mini is set up and is going to time us from 0 to 60 miles an hour. I'm going to change this drive mode from normal to sport and around again to sport plus, you can hear a bit more fake, robotic, futuristic sound being piped around the cabin, which I quite like. We'll talk about a bit more in the video. My left foot is hard down on the brake, right foot on the accelerator. Launch control is now activated. I just need to release the brake. Put my head back, and here we go. 2.77 seconds. And yes, my head does hurt again. Anything below or around 3 seconds to 60 miles an hour really hurts my head and hurts my brain. I think if cars get much quicker than this, well, I don't think they're going to be very healthy for the human body. That's massively impressive. It really is. But we all know these EVs are so quick at accelerating. What I really want to know is, does this Taycan Turbo S still feel great in the twisty stuff? Does it still feel like a Porsche underneath? Let's go and find out. You now join me on one of my favourite roads. I've knocked everything back into comfort, and while we're on that point, I mentioned this car has 761 horsepower. That's actually when it's in the overboost function. So for things like the launch control that we've just done, when you're just driving around normally, well, you're left with 625 horsepower, which is, I'm sure, enough for the majority of the time. But yeah, that quoted 761 that I talked about is only available for 2 or 3 seconds when you really need it, so for overtaking or for things like the launch control. Driving position, well, it's very good. I feel like I was sitting a little bit lower in the Panamera, and that's probably because there wasn't any batteries underneath me, but I can't complain, especially as someone who's quite lanky. These seats are very, very comfortable. Again, going back to when I first drove Tom's car, I remember I was blown away by the seats. They're reasonably supportive. You're not going to be tracking a Taycan, so they're definitely supportive enough for the public road. But they're just very comfortable. Lovely leather. Once again, I'm talking about how nice this interior is. What does this Taycan feel like on a typical British A or B road like we're on today? Well, I have to admit, my first couple of hours in this car or any Taycan that I've tried, it's always a little bit daunting. They do feel very big, very wide, very long. Feels like they've got a massive footprint. But over the 4 or 5 days that I've had the keys to this, it has shrunk around me, and Porsches in general tend to do that. The new 911, well, it's a lot bigger than, let's say, a 997 generation, but the more time you spend behind the wheel, the smaller it feels and it becomes on the road, and therefore you're not constantly paranoid about being too large. But it does take a good few hours, if not a couple of days, to get your head around that. In terms of visibility, well, looking forward is fantastic. I've got a lovely big windscreen, side windows, the door mirrors. Feels like I've got good visibility, but it's when you use your rear view mirror that you struggle. And I can imagine if you weren't as tall as me, it would really be difficult to see anything on the road behind, because if I get down a little bit, my visibility becomes even worse. So yeah, rear visibility isn't the best. Certainly could be better, and if you had someone sitting in the middle back there, well, you got no chance of seeing anything. In terms of ride comfort, well, this flagship Turbo S comes with Porsche's air suspension as standard, so not only can you adjust the ride height manually, it will also adjust depending on which mode you're in. And that means you end up with a really nice fluid ride. I can't believe that we're riding on massive 21-inch wheels with very low profile tyres. imagine what this would be like on a set of 19s or even 20s with a bit more tyre sidewall. I mean, there's not been once in the 5 days I've had this car where I've thought the ride quality is a bit hard or choppy. It really controls and manages its weight very well. The ride quality, when you're in comfort or normal, the softest setting, it's really good, and it's set up very well for the UK. But even in that setting, it manages its weight really well, so I very rarely find myself going up into a stiffer ride setting, because yeah, it just does such a good job in the softest setting. And I think that's key for any car here in the UK with our fairly dreadful poor quality roads. This car also has rear axle steering as standard, and what that means is when you come off a road like this and you want to turn back around, I mean, this is basically 5 meters long. We shouldn't be able to do this. Make sure nothing's coming. Look at that. That's amazing. I'm gonna turn my drive mode from normal up into Sport Plus because I haven't got my individual set. I'm gonna change the chassis from Sport Plus back to Sport because I think Sport Plus is just a little bit too stiff, even for the smoothest of UK roads. And well, just put my foot down. Oh, it's just so fast. Yeah, I put my foot down for about half a second there because I was straight up to the speed limit, and that's kind of some of the issue with this car. It's just way too fast for the public road. I feel like I say that a lot on the channel recently, and that's because I've had some real heavy hitters like that Panamera Turbo SE Hybrid. So fast with that as well. It's just instantaneous speed. It's instantaneous license losing speed as well. It really is. You can't keep your foot planted for more than 2 seconds without risking, you know, going well over the speed limit and losing your license. And for me, that kind of makes this car a little bit frustrating. And the second you hit the accelerator, you're trying to keep your sunglasses on your head, and you're also looking a long way down at the horizon, figuring out where your braking point is going to be, because there's just so much acceleration, there's so much momentum that you need to anticipate your braking point. The second you get on the accelerator, you're already thinking about it, just like you would be if you're flat out on a track. Let's get back to those handling dynamics because we haven't really talked about them yet. I don't know how Porsche do it, but they make all of their models, their entire lineup, feel very familiar. Whether you're in a stripped out GT3 with a manual box or something like this, or a Panamera or a Cayenne, they all have the same smell about them, the Porsche leather smell. Those of you who own one will know what I'm talking about. They all have very similar steering wheels, very similar sort of layout, whether it's fully digital like it is in here or semi-analog like it is in a 911 these days. You just feel in a very familiar place, and it extends from that. It's not just about what it feels or what it smells like. There's just something very familiar about the steering in every single Porsche. It's brilliant in every single Porsche. Since electric steering, or e-Pass, was introduced many years ago, Porsche were the first ones to not get it right. It was never as good as a hydraulic setup, but they were the first ones to actually make it feel organic, give you some steering feel, and they've done that even with this Taycan. And the first time you tip it into a bend, you've got that feel. It just feels like a Porsche. It's so planted, this car. I mean, I haven't been able to push it hard. I would love to do a lap or two of somewhere like Silverstone in this car, because I think it'd be devastatingly fast, but it would overheat very quickly. The tyres wouldn't be able to cope. And although this has massive carbon ceramic brakes as standard on it, they also would overheat pretty quickly. Remember, you're talking over 700 horsepower, in fact 760 for a couple of seconds, and 2.4 tons. Well, there's only so much tyres and brakes can do with that much momentum, but over a minute or two of pushing this hard, it's just devastatingly fast. And I just love how it still feels like a Porsche. And if I put some headphones on, well, this could be a Panamera. And I think that's the biggest compliment I can give Porsche and the Taycan in general, is how they've extracted their DNA out of something that is otherwise fairly soulless. In terms of charging this car, well, I don't think it's very fair for me to talk about that, because my current situation, I don't have a fast charger at home, and home is also my workplace. So I think the majority of people that own these have charging at home or at their work. And well, the public infrastructure of the charging network, in my eyes at least, really doesn't seem to have come very far. I made an effort to go to the Milton Keynes Ionity supercharger place that I've taken a couple of e-trons to over the past couple of years. Oh, it's like the last place you ever want to go in life. There's absolutely nothing going on there. And the 4 350 kilowatt Ionity chargers, well, none of them worked when I arrived. So I ended up on a 50 kilowatt BP pulse charger, which was charging me through the roof. I worked out to be about the same as if it was fuel, and fuel's very expensive at the moment. Then the Ionity chargers all decided to start working, so I swapped back over to one of those, and it cost me nearly 40 quid to put 110 miles of range into this car. Nearly £40 for just over 100 miles, which I just couldn't get my head around. I think it worked out at about 80 pence a kilowatt or something, but yeah, madness. So with electricity prices only going one way at the moment, it's quite scary to think how much it's soon going to cost to charge one of these up. Although there are a lot of nighttime tariffs and stuff, and relating back to what I just said, if you've got one of these, you really need to be charging it at home and during the night, where prices are a lot more affordable. And let's face it, petrol and diesel, well, those prices are just crazy at the moment. I paid £1.80 a litre of premium unleaded for my M2 the other day. So yeah, I think both electricity and fuel prices, fossil fuel prices, are just going up and up. What is my conclusion on this £140,000 Taycan Turbo S? Remember, that's before options. Well, it's an amazing piece of technology. It's an amazing vehicle. It is so fast from point to point. Too fast in the majority of situations, in fact. But yeah, amazing all the same. I love that Porsche have managed to give us some of their DNA in something that is electric. So many other manufacturers have really struggled with that. Sure, a typical EV is great in your everyday scenario of going to work and back in traffic situations, etc. But what I want as a petrol head, as someone who enjoys driving, I want some feel, and the Taycan has got as much feel as I've experienced in any EV. But I wouldn't be spending 150 odd grand on a Taycan. I'd be looking at its baby brother. I'd be looking at the base Taycan, the rear wheel drive car that retails at just over 70 grand as a base car. I would stick air suspension on there. I would stick the Performance Battery Plus on there, and potentially the rear axle steering, bigger wheels, you know, to make it look a bit better, because the base wheels on the base Taycan, a bit like the one that I had a year ago, well, they don't do its looks any favors. I'd spend 15-20 grand on options on the base Taycan, and that would be the pick of the bunch for me. In fact, a Sports Turismo version of that, so the estate version, that would be all you ever need. Sure, on paper it's got a 0 to 60 time of just over 5 seconds, but as with all EVs, it feels faster than that, and that is fast enough for the public road. It's fast enough for your family car or your big size luxury car. I really think that would be the pick of the bunch. That's the sweet spot. The base model Taycan Sport Turismo, chuck some decent options on it and away you go. Also, you get a claimed range of about 300 miles, so in reality probably 250, 260, but that's still 40 or 50 miles more than this particular car, and I believe it weighs about 200 kilos less. And I remember remarking on that when I drove that rear wheel drive. It just feels a bit more nimble again. The front axle is freed up of any motors, so you maybe arguably get a little bit more steering feel. So to me, there's just too many plus points of going for the base model car over something like this. Anyway, I'm going to end the video now because I've already talked for way too long. Hopefully you've enjoyed this. I've certainly enjoyed my time with this car, but I'll be glad to get my combustion engine car back so I don't have that range anxiety, because I don't have a charger at home, which does make a huge difference, as we talked about. I will see you at another video very, very soon. Until then, take it easy.